What's up, disciples? Zach Zender, and going to be welcoming Chris Johnson, my co-host, to join us in just a minute. Our podcast has a mission to help challenge you, and if you're a pastor, to help challenge all the people at your church to be greater disciples. We believe that when we live up to our greatest calling, which is disciples, that the world will change. And so let's do this. Hey, Kate Gardner's coming on to the podcast today. She's a friend and an amazing young woman. She was given a large inheritance at the age of 21. So some of you are like, sign me up for that. But I don't know that we should, because I don't know that most of us would have handled it the way that Kate did. I'm just blown away by her story and how this inheritance actually got her embarked on a life of generosity that's just led to so much joy that now she's teaching others how to do this. So we're going to find out how she managed this, the amazing blessings that come from an inheritance, and also that there's some challenges with that. So we're going to talk about what type of things that those in her generation, Gen Z, love to give to. And also, how do you ensure, if you're in relationship with a high net worth individual, that you don't take advantage of that? I think we got to have more conversation around that. So, hey, today's podcast is sponsored by Red Letter Living. We create resources like this one to challenge you to be greater disciples. And I want to tell you about the one that we're really spending the bulk of 2024 and 2025 on. And it's actually available for you now. It's called Giving Challenge. Giving Challenge. That's right. Kate is talking about generosity today, and we have been hard at work writing about generosity, and we've got a 40-day fresh challenge ready, coming out this fall, launching October 5, 2025 worldwide. We are asking you, pastors, if you're leading a church, do you want to get in the first wave of launching Giving Challenge at your church? Here's what you can expect with all 40-day challenges. It'll grow your small groups. It'll bring unity as you're centered around the words of Jesus Christ. And it'll be a turnkey resource. In addition to the books, we'll have sermons, kids' curriculums, graphics, small group materials, and so much more. And so we're asking, will you launch this with us October 5? We'd love for at least 50 churches to be in this first wave of bringing generosity to our churches. In addition to those other things that 40-day challenges do, here's what this one specifically will do. It'll teach through the words of Jesus what a generous life looks like. And I really believe that if your church goes through this, it will not only give you a boost in your overall giving in your church for the 40 days, but it will be a long-term boost as well. And so we'd love to come alongside of you and bring more and more generous people into your church. And so let's partner up. You can get in and pre-order right now and be one of those 50 churches. Go to redlettergiving.com. Go to redlettergiving.com. You can find all the information. We've got better deals now than we ever will have in the future, because we want you to invest in this project so we can go all in with this. And it's going to be a really powerful fall 2025. So come on, get in redlettergiving.com. We're going to get to Kate in just a minute, but I want to say thank you to those who've reached out through ratings and reviews and said that this podcast was meaningful to you. That's really our brings so much fulfillment to us when we hear that. So if this podcast has done that for you, would you leave a rating or review? And then also make sure you subscribe or follow on whatever platform you're listening or watching. And that way we can continue to have great conversations around discipleship. So with all that said, let's get to Kate Gardner. Let's do this. We have an awesome episode today at Red Letter Disciple. We're bringing on Kate Gardner. Kate Gardner is a trailblazer.
She's also a bundle of energy.
She is. And she is in the realm of next generation philanthropy. She lives in Nashville, Tennessee. She's the co-host of her podcast, the Ascendance Podcast. And she helps all people, but especially a rising voice in the next generation, to champion generosity, stewardship, and the importance of the gospel moving forward. She's got a big heart, and I can't wait for you to hear her story and be inspired, encouraged, and challenged in your own way to be the generous person that God has called you to be. So, hey, I ran into her work in our writing of our next book, Giving Challenge. And she works for a company, she volunteers for a great company called Generous Giving. And she hosted an online Journey of Generosity weekend, got to know her, love her spirit, her energy, her enthusiasm. So Kate Gardner, welcome to the Red Letter Disciple. How you doing today?
Oh, doing so well. Thank you so much, Zach. It's such an honor to be here.
Yeah, we are pumped to have you. And you are in Nashville, Tennessee.
A lot of people moving to Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah, tell us about that. What's going on in Nashville?
Why Nashville? You could go anywhere in the country, and you said, I'm going to Nashville. So what are you, a country singer? What's going on?
Great question. I'm actually a huge fan of Nashville. I'm purely here because of how I feel like God is moving. And I have many marketing lines I like to use where I'm always recruiting more people here. So I call Nashville the Jerusalem of the United States. Just throw it out there. It's bold sentiment, but I really have found incredible Christian community here and made it a home.
Nice. Okay.
That's amazing. Kate, I loved getting to know you through that online journey of generosity weekend that you facilitated through Generous Giving, and just to hear a little more of your story. I've heard your story as well, just in person and through other podcasts. And I'm just really encouraged and challenged by it too, in good ways. And so I'd love for you to tell our audience a little bit of your story and how you kind of entered into the world of, let's just call it, generosity.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So I am really grateful for a couple different lines of legacy. It's definitely a concept that I've tried to go into in my thinking and kind of personal and spiritual growth over the years as well. So I come from both a faith legacy on my mom's side of the family and have a very strong focus on prayer and generosity from that line as well. And then also come from multiple family business legacies across both my dad and mom's side of the family. And because of that, I was both raised in a household that honored God, and I've been on my own personal faith journey, of course, really starting in high school into college. And I also got to step into a legacy of inheritance and stewardship starting around the age of 21.
That's a young age to be thrust into that.
Absolutely.
I would have handled that well at 21.
I know you would not.
I would not.
I don't think you handle it well at, what are
50,
you now?
50 something? Yeah, of course. But that's all right.
But after today, you'll be able to, because
I
she's
think
going to
so.
teach us.
Yeah, she's going to teach us.
There we go. Well, I truly say by the grace of God alone, absolutely. And a real testament to my parents' parenting as well.
Yeah.
In that, they just modeled their own lives of serving others and walking with character and being thoughtful. And so I was able to, starting right around the end of college, focus on my own giving and this posture of wanting to live a life of generosity out of my faith journey, which I'm so grateful for.
That's amazing. And I don't know, it's so cool to see that you had kind of a couple different legacies going, like a faith legacy, but also a business financial legacy that you stepped into, and they're colliding as one. And I don't know many 21-year-olds that would have been ready for that. And so I think when most people hear the story, of receiving some sort of inheritance or stock portfolio or something that gets dropped down to them, they secretly, and actually I would say most of them not so secretly, wish I want that to be my story.
Well, they don't want to end up like the prodigal son,
Right.
you're in the, eating the pig food and I wonder if dad will hire me back after I blew my inheritance. Yeah. So,
So what was it like then to receive that inheritance, and were you ready for it? Did you know it was coming? Just talk to us go back into that moment where you got that and tell us what that was like.
Absolutely. So I had definitely known that something was coming. I didn't know the amount. So my parents did a good job of letting me know that, hey, because of, these businesses and opportunities that we come from, we do want to invite you into a life of getting to think about that yourself. And a cool way that they structured things that I actually really recommend to any families out there that are considering inheritance was that they did give me a lot of agency and choice. Sometimes inheritance can be passed down in ways that have a lot more control and kind of very pointed use for them. But a huge part of my story was getting to receive that feeling of freedom. And my dad actually said that to me when he gave it. I'll never forget. He said, the morning of my 21st birthday, your mother and I want you to have this, and we're doing this because we believe in you, and we want you to be able to run with your dreams. And when I talk about that, I actually love to kind of bring in a gospel parallel there, because I think on some level, it's very similar to what Jesus does in our lives. I always think of Ephesians 1:3. I believe that we've been blessed with every spiritual blessing in Christ Jesus. And that idea that everything's been done for us. And the journey of the Christian life is to say, how does this apply to me? And how do I be a good steward of the gospel? So I know that's a big idea, and very, obviously stewarding worldly wealth is a very small component of that. But I've really wrestled with that. And per your question, Zach, there have been some amazing opportunities. And again, kind of this sense of calling that's come out of it for me. There's also been some incredible challenges with it, feeling very different than my peers. I have had some situations where I felt taken advantage of, or just kind of handled without care throughout my 20s. So it's been quite the journey, but God has, and another way I love talking about it is that I feel like my journey with stewardship has refined my faith. And that is the thing that obviously keeps me going, and the reason why I feel like it's been a path that I've felt called in.
So I have a question. So you have this on your 21st birthday, and you're told that this is going to go down. You're going to get a pretty significant inheritance. I think part of the pressure there is that there's so many needs locally. There's so many needs. And like, how do you even begin to discern, oh my gosh, what do I do with this? Like the burden of that.
Yes. It's a great nuance to it. I really, have wrestled with that a lot. And I think anyone with a heart of generosity feels that way of, oh my goodness, there's kind of limitless in our modern era, things to get involved in abroad and locally. I actually did find a model that was incredibly helpful to me in those first few years after the inheritance. And the way I describe it too is it was enough to live off of and kind of establish this philanthropy vein that I've traveled on. I'm not out there like doing like massive private equity sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So it's an amount that could just kind of become this little ministry of sorts. And I think it was about 2 years shortly after I graduated from college, one of my first pastors in my young adult life did a lot of teaching in a really healthy way on stewardship. And he imparted this idea that you tithe not only what you make, but anything that you receive. And so that was what put me in the position with this kind of theological conviction that I needed to do this. And so I actually sat down with the word and with, again, a couple of teachers and mentors. And I went into this model that is out there kind of, especially in the book of Deuteronomy around chapter 14, of what I like to call the 3 tithes of the Old Testament. Because most people think when they think tithe, they think, 10% to the church and the Levitical leaders. And y'all can explain this way better than me. But basically, there's also a couple other tithes throughout some of those books and chapters in the Old Testament that talk about giving to the poor and also celebrating the festivals that the Lord ordained. And so I actually took that on as an actual model of the 3 tithes. And as I looked back on my first 21 years of life, who and what people and organizations would fall into those 3 categories. So that was a really helpful way that I dove in to trying to be an intentional giver. And out of that, found so much joy in getting to support churches that had been meaningful to me over my life. Ministries of compassion in different countries that felt relevant in that category, and just go from there, if that makes sense.
It's interesting you bring that. I've got a quick story. So I just started a church plant outside of Orlando, and it's designed for 20 and 30 somethings. And the one thing that they're really passionate about is serving. And it's interesting because I feel like I can get the 20 and 30-year-olds to understand that serving is really important. But then my 50 and 60-year-olds will just say, here's some money, go take care of it, and like the difference between the two. And I've got a lot of both. So recently we supported an organization down in Guatemala, Child Beyond International.
Yeah.
That's a sponsor for our podcast. But we're sending 22 people down to this orphanage to build more rooms, and because it's always 100% filled. And I had several people come to me and say, why are you working in Guatemala when we have so many problems in Orlando? And I had to go home and pray about that and wrestle through that. And what I came back with was, I don't think this is an either or situation.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can do good locally and we can do good globally, but it's still trying to balance that out. And I didn't understand before we started talking, it feels like what you're doing is 100% a full-time job, trying to discern where to help. Okay. And then it's I want to make sure that I'm stewarding this really well. And I know that even in church and ministries, there's some organizations that might try to take advantage of me. Just the discernment that goes around at 21 years old. Holy cow. That's amazing. Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And that's a beautiful story too. Absolutely. I think that speaks really directly to this area of discernment. And I love sharing with my story as well. Another kind of ministry and group that's given me a lot of vision for this, exactly what you were just talking about as well, called Gospel Patrons. And it's out there. They have their website, gospelpatrons.org, and their book. And I'm the biggest fan because actually reading Gospel Patrons book, which talks about business people usually throughout history who stood behind people in ministry, usually in a hidden way, and were their patrons, their donors, and how much that has been a huge part of the kingdom expanding with that hidden role of giving. That really did give me this category, exactly like you just said, that this is a calling on some people's lives. And I'll never forget, I was literally listening to the book in a cab in New York City, and I felt like I had a moment with God where he said, you could do this. And that was in my early 20s, what has really led me into this and kind of trying to think through what are God's priorities? What am I wired for? And how can I build a giving focus out of that?
Well, that was a good God moment in a cab in New York. It doesn't usually happen that way. So
I think there's a lot of God moments in cabs in New York from what I've heard.
Subways.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said, because you kind of hinted at, you guys could tell me more about this, the 3 tithes. And initially, like a year or two ago, I would not have been able to. And I went to seminary. And so it's very possible that I learned about this. It's very possible that they taught this to me in seminary and I just wasn't paying attention, or in one ear and out the other. I'm not going to say I was the world's greatest student.
What?
Which, is about discipleship as being a student. But anyway, I actually don't think hardly anybody knows about the 3 tithes, and you just mentioned it quickly. So I'd like to jump back to that. And for you, since it was foundational for you, because the more I look into it, I'm really intrigued by it. And especially, for pastors that teach the tithe, which is great, teach the Old Testament, which is fabulous. I don't know that we're getting the most out of it if we only teach a part of it. And so that's where, talk to us about those 3 tithes. There's the Levitical, the Levitical tithe, which goes to the Levites and to the tabernacle or the temple. There's the festival tithe, and then there's the poor tithe, which is every 3 years given. And so I just don't think people hear this language. So can you jump back into that and share a little bit of what you learned?
Absolutely, yes. And I pulled up a couple scripture references I can throw out there if helpful for others. So in my understanding, yes, the main tithe that people consider was, one of the names for it is the priestly tithe. I have the scripture Numbers 18:21 through 26. And that was basically the salary for the religious leaders, the Levites in those days of ancient Israel. for upkeep of the temple. And so that's, of course, I think it does make sense that is the one that carries forward the most in terms of supporting those who are uniquely called as priests to serve God as pastors in our modern age. So that's that one. And again, for me, that was thinking about my life and, who are the people who have discipled me? Who are the people who really raised me up in faith? College ministry leaders and churches growing up and things like that. The second tithe that I'll mention is, yes, the charity tithe. So specifically the tithe to the poor in the land. And I have the scripture, Deuteronomy 14:28-29, if helpful. And what was cool about that one, actually, per what you were mentioning earlier too, Chris, was that the concept, in my understanding, was it was to be collected in each city in ancient Israel. And so each city was supposed to take care of itself, of the foreigners, orphans, and the vulnerable. So I do think there is that sense, and I think it's in a lot of us, right? We want to do proximate giving. I do think, obviously, in our modern world and with the missional aspect of the church, there can be that focus on others. And I actually, my primary focus on giving that I've built out, and that's another story, has become on missionaries specifically, because I personally feel that kind of church planting drive and desire as well. But that was the charity tithe. And then the last one, which I think there could be so much creativity around this, that's why I love that you brought it up more, Zach, is the festival tithe. And I have Deuteronomy 14:22-27 about that one. And what was cool was that it was a tithe, of course, in that day and age, the crop harvested was the tithe. And what you were asked to do was actually consume the tithe yourself, as well as with the Levites in your land, to celebrate, again, God's festivals that he had ordained in scripture. And so I've actually had a lot of fun thinking about that one in my journey as well. As like, okay, there is a tithe concept that is actually also for you to enjoy, to partake in. And I've actually, a way I've encouraged people in this concept of the tithe is to do things like go on mission trips, put on gatherings for your church or things like that, where you can, in a sense, like fund even yourself to participate in the work of God, and just know that you are kind of serving him. So again, this is all kind of my creative reimagining of what's possible. I don't want to claim this is like direct, biblical interpretation at all, but it's been really helpful to me. Again, back to that area of, those of us who have this focus on giving, how do we go about this in a helpful way?
So good. And I've even, since learning about it, I've been rethinking a little bit just in my head, and it's a journey, like you said, right? That's why I love Journey of Generosity that you guys do at Generous Giving. It's a journey. And, I was even thinking the two festivals, if you will, that the churches do, they go all out for, of course, are Easter and Christmas, or Christmas Eve. And, I think sometimes we might feel guilty with all the planning and the effort and the time and the money. And then when I read something like the festival tithe, which is like, you do this to consume yourself, but to glorify and remember how good God has been. Like, if we just had a slight pivot on understanding what those were and kind of see it more in those contexts, I think a lot of us are already spending a lot of money at Christmas. We just have forgot the point. We may actually be spending a tithe on some of these celebrations. We're not enjoying, I suppose, the fruit of what those festivals maybe were meant to. You enjoy
those festivals.
I mean, I try to.
You have the big blowouts at your place.
We have a good time. Yeah. Why wouldn't we, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's fascinating. And, in the Old Testament, you go further, you got that Malachi 3:10 to test and bring it into the storehouse. And that probably refers to the Levitical tithe, I believe, in my understanding. And there's other interesting things there about the poor that if they did not have 10 animals, because they didn't have currency like we did, that they could not actually tithe. So that they were kind of dismissed from it, if you will. And I think sometimes we get that teaching wrong. So in other words, there's just a lot more to it. And so that's what I've kind of found through what you've said and what I've learned through the work that you do, Kate, and in my own understanding is just there's a lot more to it than it's just a 10%, write a check, and you've done your job, which I think is sometimes mindless and not the best. And when I see someone like you who understands it and is living it out, I'm also seeing like a real joy in you. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I want to pivot for a second. Like, you're doing all these things for others. Cool. And you are changing the kingdom. I want you to know that. but what is it doing in you?
Such a great question. Yes, it really is one of my favorite ways to almost, in a sense, like market generosity, because I do believe exactly what you said, Zach, that it changes us. And it is one of the most fun things that I think we're wired for, that God put that in us, that if we can be mindful and creative as givers, that there is a light and a real sense of purpose that comes out of that. So absolutely, returning to that moment for me of giving that initial tithe, I had a couple stories. I literally made this spreadsheet, and I was like, okay, these are the groups, and this is what I feel led in. And I was able to give some of the gifts anonymously. I was able to do a couple as matching grants, which is a cool tool to sometimes offer nonprofits and say, hey, do you want to take this and maybe multiply it 2x by offering it in like Giving Tuesday or something like that. But for me, so doing a couple of those gifts, I got a couple like calls and feedback back from people. And one especially that, as I say, really deeply impacted me, where a ministry that I had received a lot from, I'd done their ministry school, and I was really inspired by their leadership. They called me and they were like, hey, wow, like first off, how are you able to give this? And like, what is like, you were just with us in Africa anyway. But I told them my story, and they were like, well, Kate, you have no idea, but this amount of money this month is basically exactly with the match what was needed to save the ministry. And that like wrecked me, as I say, because I was like, wow, how is it that I had no idea? That was not my plan, my idea, right? But somehow there was that feeling of God using me so far beyond what I could even expect. And again, just back out of my own story of receiving myself, that just changed my life and really kind of gave me that thrill of feeling like God was leading me beyond what I knew. And so things like that have really just, again, marked me and showed me that this is a legitimate calling. Another quick story is that in my journey, especially of supporting missionaries, I have also been able to chat with them, pray with them, visit them, and things like that have just consistently given me a sense of being interwoven into the body of Christ, even in different parts of the world. And so getting to, again, not only support the work, like you're saying, give financially, but also be personally involved has really become a sense for me of purpose that has changed me.
So good. And, Jesus says it's more blessed to give than to receive. And those are his words. So it's like, this is when we have joy from giving, it's not like we're recreating science, right? Mm-hmm. This is science just confirming and people's lives confirming what Jesus already said. And so one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, we have a lot of pastors in our audience that listen and they're hearing all the trends, and especially the importance of Gen Z, which, by all charts appears very spiritually open. And in one realm feels like revival is happening. And Carey Nieuwhof just came out with his trends for 2025. And so there's a lot of revival happening. But then on the other side, there's also a lot of retreat happening. So it's kind of a lot on the extremes. Mm-hmm. And so in the middle of this extremes, we are going through the greatest wealth transfer of our day, estimates around $90 trillion that are going to be transferred. And of course, not all that's come into Gen Z. A lot of that's actually going to Gen X, millennials, and others. But my question is, with all of this going on in the background, like how are those inheriting it ready for it? And how would they get ready for it, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. It's such a great question. And it really has become such a sense of passion in my life, again, just out of my own unexpected journey as well. I am hopeful and excited, but also definitely feel that fear of the Lord for my generation and those younger as well. I personally definitely do continue to see the centrality of discipleship for this generation and those to come. And that's why actually I've tried to not only focus again on the stewardship of resources, but also in some senses, what I want to think about as the stewardship of my story. And that's why I've actually, tried to share it more and raise up others to think about these things together. And so that's why my podcast Ascendance, my also next gen friend and I felt to do that, which was to allow inheritors to tell their own stories and to seek to impart wisdom to those who are in that position. And that has been it felt again, so meaningful to try to give examples of this in our culture, because it can be incredibly hard to think about, talk about, the fear of judgment, the fear that people are going to not understand the complexity or the burden of the stewardship journey. So that podcast, we also actually came out with a little book in the last few months called Becoming Ascendants.
Nice.
Is trying to kind of a little bit more so give a framework for thinking about passing on inheritance and wealth transfer for families. And then also a ministry group that a couple of friends and I started called Magnify, which is the idea of magnifying the Lord and then in some way magnifying the family legacies that we come from. So those are just a couple of resources that I've tried to kind of cultivate out of my own journey. But I absolutely would want to encourage pastors and those, who care about Gen Z and the generation to come to really think about this topic. Because again, I think that there is to stewarding wealth so many sides of it. I like to call it the burden of blessing, because it is a blessing. And of course, there's that sense of opportunity that comes with it, but there's also so much complexity. So I would definitely encourage pastors to lean in, to not let those things intimidate them, but to know that there is a need that I personally felt and I've seen in many people now to have this calling at the forefront of what they're thinking about for their lives.
So
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I'm thinking about, you're probably one of the there's probably not a lot of people that have gone through the situation that you've gone through at your age. I remember when I was young and first started going to church, I felt like pretty guilty that I couldn't put much in the offering plate because I was living like paycheck to paycheck. And I remember every time the plate passed by, I just had this overwhelming sense of guilt. Like I should probably put more in, but I'm not really getting it done. And so my question here is, what about for those people who are your age, who are kind of just scraping by? Maybe they're paycheck to paycheck. They have credit card debt, whatever it might be. But they have this internal sense that they should do something, right? Speak a little bit about that, because I'm sure you've not always been in this position.
Yeah.
What do you say to that person who is kind of feeling guilty that they should do more, but they feel like they can't?
Yes, that is such a great question. And I absolutely love that posture, right? And it always makes me think of the parable in the Gospels about about generosity, where Jesus points out the widow with the two mites, I think it was, and says she is the one who's truly generous.
Right.
So I absolutely believe that it really is those who are probably struggling with this the most that God looks at and says that matters. Like that heart posture is what I want, not just a large check or something that's just easy and mindless, of course. So absolutely. I just, I'm so inspired. Those people are my heroes, obviously, because in, those of us who are stewarding larger amounts, there's a thoughtfulness, there's a planning that is needed, and it's hard. But it really is, that sense of, Lord, this is my everything. That I think that's what the heavenly reward is for, right? So I would just celebrate those people. I would say, God sees you, even if it's, 50 cents in the offering bucket. Like, I mean, it can make me cry because I'm like that. I mean, that's the heart, right? That is truly what I think the Lord wants for all of us. And sometimes, it's money. Sometimes it's your action. Like even in my story, obviously from my financial position, but really I've thought a lot about my time and, how we all have such limited time for our vocation. And so yeah, that's been something where I'm like, Lord, I want to maximize my time for you and do that in a costly way. So I would just, yeah, just kind of want to hold that and just encourage those people that God is in it. And I do believe that he will reward you, and that, yeah, if this is something that fires you up, surround yourself with people who love generosity. Explore different ministries and opportunities like generous giving, like gospel patrons, like Red Letter Living.
Come on.
Yeah, like the new book on giving coming out.
Let's go.
Which looks amazing to encourage yourself in that way.
Talk about, I don't think it's talked about much. Talk about heavenly rewards from what you understand about it. Because you mentioned it, that God will have reward, and that there'll be heavenly rewards even for not just even, but for all those that do anything, I think, on behalf of God in this world.
Absolutely. And I won't claim to be any sort of theological expert. There's a couple of people, Randy Alcorn especially is a favorite author of mine, who writes a lot about giving and heavenly rewards. I definitely point people to a couple more resources out there. But in my understanding, it is a legitimate thing that we're obviously saved by grace and salvation. And again, everything we have is a gift. But God cares about what we do with this life. And of course, I think about, parable of the talents, which is one of my, life scriptures in a sense, is, people are given certain amounts of what they have in their life to steward. And there's an opportunity to either hide in fear or to step up and say, I'm going to try to multiply this for God's sake. And then he says, well done. And then he gives in relation to their faithfulness. So again, I think these things are messy, and we'll only fully understand it the other side of heaven. But I do think that it is something that we should keep in mind, and is a beautiful thing to think about, is turning, worldly wealth into heavenly treasure is possible. My last example of that, I think this is a Randy Alcorn example that I love, is the comparison, if this makes sense, of worldly wealth, almost like dollars in Confederate America, but right before it changed over to the Union, that it was like that money before that government failed, there was a set amount of time to turn it into money in the Union. Before it expired worthless, in a sense.
Wow.
And that's been a helpful paradigm for me. That's what money of this world is. It will expire. It will be meaningless, but there's a window of time to turn it into something that actually will endure.
Whoa, that's a really cool thought to have. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's motivating, right?
Change it to gold. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
What does Jesus say? Moths and vermin will destroy things we store up for ourselves.
Such an encourager.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we can store up heavenly treasures.
Oh, that's
moths and vermin do not destroy.
Don't destroy.
This is straight out of the Sermon on the Mount, Chris.
I've heard
it's found in the Gospel of Matthew.
I've seen it.
Matthew's a book in the New Testament.
Is that New Testament? Okay. Yes. Yes. It is New Testament with the genealogy.
And it has numbers that organize the chapter. I'll tell you about it later. Anyway,
left to right. Okay.
Unless you're reading Hebrew,
then it's right to left.
There you go. You are smart. Look at
Japanese is up to down.
I don't know that. I'd love. Okay, so in your generation, I do feel like they're kind of stirred and drawn maybe a little differently than previous generations.
Oh, you're being sweet.
And I'd love to know, like, for a pastor, from a pastor's heart, like, what kind of things captures. I don't know, every person is different, but what kind of captures the essence of Gen Z generosity? Like, what do they like giving to?
Ooh, yes. I love this question with the thoughtfulness of seeing, what is possible with the next generation. So one thing I personally have felt, and I do feel like I've seen this reflected a lot in peers, is the desire to not only give money, kind of like the example y'all gave earlier, but also to give their time and their giftings and their service. I think one of the things I've seen with Gen Z is this longing to have their work be purposeful, right? That feeling of like we want, with the modern era, to feel like we're engaged and we're making an impact. So I think definitely trying to think through the combination of how people can serve both with money and with their engagement is really exciting. And again, it's something that I've really tried to take on in terms of more of my vocational path. But for instance, another quote I like to share that's been a big part of my own discernment is from Frederick Buechner, who says that, in a sense, your calling is where your greatest joy meets the world's deepest need. And I've really taken on, again, more in the position of a giver to say, okay, what is that? And for me personally, just as an example, I've really felt like my passion is encouragement. And I love getting to try to come in and, pray and impart energy to people in ministry. So again, for me, there's been a pairing of my giving with that. So I think, again, on the flip side, per your question, as a pastor, as a nonprofit leader, I would try to think through, okay, if I want to get people involved financially, of course, because that's needed, how might I also engage their giftings, their wirings? I've seen a lot of nonprofits start young adult boards or create little teams to run events or have prayer calls, one of my personal passions. So I think just giving a sense that, there can be more partnership could be a way to think about Gen Z giving as well.
That's cool. So not just tied to the dollars, but letting them, be a part of it and putting more than their investment financially into it, but more of their heart investment. I think when you say, you're an encourager, I don't know if I see that in you, Kate. Talk to me about, okay. Again, I think everybody's like, all right, if I have to sign up for a problem or go through challenges, I want the challenge and the problems that Kate has, right? I think I've heard something called sudden wealth syndrome, or you see something like played out where someone wins the lottery and then all of a sudden their life goes to, what? And so talk to me a little bit about what are those challenges that you have to walk.
The other interesting thing, I've had this happen. I've worked at a church for 21 years now. I have had this happen so many times. Like, I'll stand up and say, hey, we're raising money for Guatemala. We're raising money for this. And every time I do something like that, somebody will come up and say, Pastor, when I win the lottery, I'm going to hook you up.
Right.
I'm going to hook you up.
And you're like, you haven't given a dime.
Exactly.
And you're doing just fine.
Yeah.
And
You've got a 6-figure job and you donate $5 a week. I think we're going to be good. And I'm going to promise you're not going to win the lottery. So let's just talk about generosity for a second.
Totally. Yes. I think that, so I'm glad you brought up sudden wealth syndrome, Zach. It's been a really validating online discovery for me with this terminology. Basically, there's research that shows people that win the lottery, or I think inheritors is a similar paradigm, almost like 80% of them lose it all.
Ugh.
It's crazy to think about, especially with those massive lottery amounts. And I have many theories about it because I think that wealth presents a lot of challenges, especially in terms of decision making. And in a sense, having a healthy relationship to your own power. And with amounts of money, you could do whatever you want with them. And so there's an added layer of thoughtfulness. And usually what I encourage people in this circumstance is to slow down and to really kind of take the time to think through what are wise, precautions and things they could put in place, hiring advisors, building friendships with people who could help you with decision-making. So I think just, taking the time to be thoughtful is needed and can be hard for the human brain. There's another research study actually that I love to reference, done out of Yale, I believe, that talks about, this is a funny small example, but buying jam at a supermarket. And what the study shows is they set up a little market area, and I had 7 jams, and people would come and try the jams and buy one or whatever. So they did that, and then they had a market with 23 jams or something like that. And the fascinating result of the study was that more people were attracted to the 23 jams because they were like, whoa, I've never seen this amount of flavors and that sort of thing. But way less people bought a jam when there were 23 jams rather than when there were 7, because the human brain is not designed to take in limitless options, that feeling. And I think that is a huge part of the journey with wealth stewardship, is that literally biologically, in a sense, our brains shut down because like we were talking about earlier, there's just too many options that I cannot process it. and kind of get to a conclusion. And so I think that that's one side of the journey with wealth, of really having to steward this sense of there's just too much and I can't handle it.
Hmm.
And that's why, again, I think that the need for community around generosity and stewardship is so huge. Because for me, those friendships with people who are in those positions have helped me kind of get to a place of feeling empowered and not just completely overwhelmed. And then, of course, there's the side of it too of like, kind of how do other people relate to me when they know about this side of my journey?
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. Like,
Yeah.
that's exactly, and maybe this is too personal. We can cut it out. But has it been? I don't know. You're not married, are you?
No, yeah.
Has it affected like your dating decisions and stuff like that? Like, that is honestly a question that I wanted to know from the beginning. Like, this adds another layer to does this person really actually care for me, or do they care about the everything that I bring, like, and just, can you speak on that briefly with friendships and with like dating?
Yeah, totally. Oh, it's been such a journey. We can talk more offline, Chris, if you
Okay. Yeah. I'm just
but
curious
no,
about that.
but yeah, absolutely. No, it definitely has become a very complex area to navigate. And yeah, I've been really hurt. I mean, I definitely have been through situations with people who work for nonprofits, with lots of different things where I think people just don't even realize sometimes. I really chalk it up a lot to, again, like human psychology, where there's just a lot of ways that you have to kind of navigate feeling drawn to, like things like, wealth, but really kind of backing up and saying, okay, what matters here? And yeah, just again, that centrality of dignity in how we relate to each other.
Yeah.
Another pastor said something I just love. It's always stuck with me, of this idea. It's a simple phrase, but money makes you funny. And it just makes everything weird. And that's kind of why I think I'm so passionate about talking about it, is it really can just be this like complexifying factor. So I'm continually on the journey of how do I understand, what I need. It's funny, I'll just throw this out there for anyone who might resonate, but I actually watched the movie a couple nights ago, Young Victoria, about the Queen Victoria ascending to power and her journey of having so much stewardship, of course, of her life and her nation, and how she related to people around her, including her future husband, Albert. And that was just really encouraging this week. So that's where I am. But absolutely, it's an important thing to think about. And just a good thing, again, to kind of get out into the light.
Well, if you want Zach and I to go through some future suitors, we've really got.
Thank you, guys.
We can figure it out and go through the first layer and then send you
there you go.
some folks.
I'm not sure how that would look, but we can figure it out offline if we want.
We'll figure it out.
But
I love it.
to that though, I'm glad you asked that, Chris, because I think there's a lot of us as pastors or who are in ministry, and we minister to all types.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us have a wealthy friend or some wealthy friends, high impact influence with dollars. And I've always tried to be personally very careful not to take advantage of those relationships. And so I'd kind of love to hear from you, like, what would be a healthy way for a pastor or ministry leader to approach someone of means? That may or may not come with an ask, but like, are there certain like guidelines or things that are important for us to remember that when we're talking to a high net worth individual?
It does get weird,
right?
It does get weird.
I think that sometimes we don't know how to navigate that. And the last thing I want to do is take advantage. And yet at the same time, I also want what's best for them.
Yeah.
And a lot of times those high net worth individuals can, like you, experience so much more joy, I think, than they're currently getting with their net worth. And so there's just this really delicate balance as a pastor of dealing with high net worth individuals. So is there any wisdom that you can give me?
That's such a great question, Zach. It really is a balance. And I think both ways, of course, too. And, I especially when I talk with fundraisers, I'm the first person who says, hey, when y'all invite, me and people with resources to give, that's a blessing to me. I mean, that's an invitation for me to, again, receive spiritual reward, to receive joy. So I definitely encourage, those in a position of nonprofit leadership to be bold, with that, because it is, and it's our role. Again, if we go back to the gospel patrons concept, or, this idea that giving is so central to the Christian life, it is what we're asked to do, in the ways that we are led by the Lord. With that being said, I think the biggest ways that I personally have been hurt and kind of, seen this area grow is just to really keep the relationship at the forefront of the interaction. And also something I've seen too, the types of organizations and individuals that I love to walk through as a giver now are usually the people actually too who have a very long-term mindset about our connection and our partnership together. And so I think just, I can already tell both of y'all and, so many people who are pastors and work in ministry just really do have a love for people. And I think just to put that at the forefront of the connection, really getting to know people and their stories and their needs and what they're struggling with. And again, I think these are all kind of, obvious, but I would say just really kind of keeping that at the forefront of just knowing that, again, one way I like to talk about wealth too in a kingdom sense is way more than physical money. True wealth is our relationships. It is our connections with people that I think we are the most blessed by. And there's psychological studies that prove that too, that the people who are happiest and feel the most full and rich in their lives are the people with the strongest relationships. So I think to really just cultivate that heart and posture is what we all kind of, I think, need and want, and then too.
Yeah, so good. I think your story's incredible. And like, that's where I want to kind of land the plane is that in this generosity, or all through all the study of giving, and as people are listening in and recognizing this may be an issue in their life, the more people that give and you hear their stories, like, it's just transformational. And so talk to me about the power of stories and actually just living this out for someone who's on the fence, or like knows that they need a relationship change with money, but isn't quite sure like why. Like, what about your story and where you were and to where you are today can kind of help them see that there is more joy on the generous side than the receiving side?
And a follow-up question to that, Kate. I fly here from Orlando to Omaha to do this podcast. And the last time, yesterday, when I flew up, I sat next to the bathroom door. And I just wonder if you could talk to Zach about being a little bit more generous and maybe upgrading my seat to first class.
Because I gave the analogy of landing the plane, that's where you went.
That's exactly
okay,
where I was thinking. Or maybe.
Wow.
Love it. That's y'all are the best. I think one posture that I would definitely consider, or love to share is just really knowing the seriousness and the depth of this area. One thing I love to bring up too is just how much scripture talks about money. I think that there's stats that show it's like 22 times more than heaven and hell combined are the scriptures about finances. And I like to say it's because money kind of points on some level to where you're going and to what you care about, shall we say. So I think that there is a weight to it. And I also want to encourage people that there is a freedom and there is a joy in it. And as much as again, there's the scriptures, too much is given, much is required. But there's also, again, that sense that Jesus has done everything for us and that we are free. And, again, even the story of the prodigal son or others, there is this sense of having a good father that would put you in first class on a plane. No, just kidding. There you go, Chris. You're welcome.
Thank you.
But no, I think there really should be, I think, this quality to our journey with the Lord, which again, I put that back most of all to our personal devotional life, to, the heart that we seek to cultivate of just saying, God, this is all yours. money, time, relationships, everything. Show me, lead me. I think another thing I've gone back to a lot is just the dependency on my personal relationship with the Lord and trying to discern his voice. Because we all live lives of so many decisions all the time in our modern era, there is that need of, God, what is your priority for me today? And again, I'm not even called to think about tomorrow. I'm not even called to think about, hopefully at some point when I do get married or things like that.
Yeah.
But today, what is my faithfulness? What is my step of saying I'm going to live a life not focused inwardly and selfishly, but outwardly and lovingly? So to keep things grounded in the now, but to test the waters. Randy Alcorn again talks about tithing, like training wheels on a bike. I think there are things that we can do to just do a little bit more generosity, to just try one more step that can kind of end up showing us, oh man, I can do this. I can give more than I thought I could. And then to just, again, have fun with it, be relational as much as possible. And I challenge everyone here to see what God can do if you choose to try to focus with and lead with generosity, and just the incredible opportunities that can open up.
Well, it seems like you're joyful. That seems to be working out.
And you said that word, I challenge everybody. So that may go into our last question, because we ask all of our guests at the end. This is a podcast where we want to challenge people. We have a high challenge culture here at Red Letter Disciple. Like, just try this stuff, just do the stuff we're talking about, and then see how it goes. And, and so we ask all our guests, challenge our listeners, that if they could do one thing this week practically to help them be a greater disciple, what would you challenge them to do?
Ooh, I love that question so much. I'm gonna actually take a little piece of the generous giving curriculum, which I would definitely recommend to others here as well, which is the idea of sitting with the Lord. Perhaps I'm gonna say, 5-10 minutes. Let's keep it feeling easy, and cultivate silence and ask him, Lord, is there something that I can be generous with this week? And just see what comes up. I think, again, for me, moments of that, what I like to call like encounters with the Lord over different seasons of my life, have become those moments that have led to so much more. So I think, again, trying to keep generosity grounded in that place of personal relationship with the Lord, but taking that time, that moment in your day. Maybe it's when you're driving in your car, even, or when you're about to go to bed, and just ask the Lord, how can I grow my generosity, or what are you asking me to be generous with right now?
That's so good.
Yeah.
All right, listeners, if you take that challenge, let us know, #RedLetterDisciple, or email us, hello@redletterchallenge.com. We want to just encourage you along the way, like Kate, be a constant encourager and cheerleader for what you're doing, and taking those steps are really awesome. And so, all right, before we leave, Chris usually has a game type of segment for our guest to make it personal for you. So I think he's created one for you. Is that right, Chris?
I did. We spend a lot of time putting together the best games on the podcast universe. And so, Kate, I think we've learned a lot today. You have high energy. You're clearly joyful. And just a lot of fun, right, Zach?
Yeah.
Just a lot of fun. I heard a podcast once, Kate, by this guy who is an investment guy, and he was advising lottery winners. And he said, this was his advice. He goes, this is what I recommend. If you want to keep your money, the very first thing you do is you take 10% and you buy whatever you want. And then you take another 10% and you donate that. And then you sit with me and I invest, and we figure out a plan for the rest of your life. So you are, at 21 years old, handed this amount of money. And this is a personal question. I just want to know, at 21, did you have a favorite, like, okay, this is my one-time splurge, I'm going to do it. I was a poor college student prior to this, but I'm going to give, God, but just, I want to buy this. And Kate, what was that?
Oh, it's such a great question. I wish I had a better answer for you, Chris, to be honest. People do ask me that, by the way. I get it. Well, honestly, what comes to mind is, this is just a more general answer, but hopefully in alignment with what you're thinking. I've had a lot of fun with like cars over the years.
Okay.
I think cars are like fun. Like,
Okay, so What was it? What car was it?
Yes, it was my bright blue Mini Cooper convertible.
Oh, okay. So not crazy. That's not crazy.
Yeah.
That's not
Yeah,
crazy.
no, I knew that's why my wife loved you. She's got a little Mini Cooper as well.
Oh,
So
yes,
dream
yes.
car. Yeah,
Okay,
she
all right.
zips around in her red one.
Yes, and that's because you won the lottery, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's part of my story.
All right, and so now we get into the game show, and we've
Ooh.
heard you're very generous. This is so good, but let's just
But I like that.
let's just do this. Like, let's say you had to choose between one of two things. Okay, Kate. You get to take the family on a trip on a yacht, or you get to take the family on a trip on a private jet. What would it be?
Ooh, great question. I would be a private jet girl in that.
Okay, yes,
in
yeah,
case.
that is the correct
The
answer.
seasickness is a little tough.
Yeah, no,
it's a correct.
that's the correct answer. Yeah, you're
Oh,
one
wow.
for one. Okay,
I didn't realize it was a correct.
no,
I thought
this
was
is-
opinion.
this is if you go 3 for 3, then Zach's going to match your next give to any nonprofit.
I was gonna send her 23 jams, but whatever.
24 jams. All right, I'm the listener. So now let's say, are you a Taylor Swift fan? Are you a T Swift fan?
Lightly.
Okay. So now here's the opportunity. You either have an opportunity for 4 backstage Taylor Swift tickets.
Or how about any
Okay, any concert.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, change the rules. That's fine. I've only been working days on that.
Because she said lightly.
All right,
so,
all right. Or floor, do you like sports?
Less lightly, but still a little.
Okay, so backstage to any concert or floor seats for any sporting event. Could be the Super Bowl, whatever.
Love it.
What are you taking?
Ooh, I would go concert.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm a bit. I love music for sure. It'd
Okay.
probably be if y'all want a musician from me, it'd probably be a Forrest Frank.
Okay.
Frank concert. I'm a huge fan.
Okay, there we go. Backstage. We're going to get
And
to this.
Nashville, that makes sense.
Nashville. There
Yeah.
you go. Yeah. All right. Final question. Zach put this one together. Ski trip to the mountains, which he's definitely not going on because
No.
he fell down a Benny Hill for the entire last trip, or relaxing on a glorious beach.
Oh, the beach. The beach. Absolutely. Yes.
Well, come on down to Florida. We've got plenty of them.
Oh, I'm a big fan. Definitely.
All right. All right. Kate, thank you so
Was
much.
she right?
She went 2 for 3. So
Oh,
we're not,
she just missed
you don't
out.
have to. You,
Sporting?
don't
Did I fail with the sporting?
you did. You did.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Just missed out. on
Let's
those
get,
jams.
let's get my future husband in the picture, and then maybe that'll change.
Maybe you should have thought about him. Okay.
Darn
Maybe
it.
you should have thought about him.
Darn it.
Kate, you've been a joy today. If people want to connect with you, where can they do that?
Yes. I'm out there on LinkedIn. I've shared a lot of my resources, kind of some of the different things I've mentioned there. If you look me up, Kate Gardner, that might be the easiest way. But yeah, any way through y'all too.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We'll put a bunch of those links in the show notes too for the things that she referenced and talked about. And congrats on the new book. I missed that. Becoming an Ascendant. Is that what it is?
Becoming Ascendants. Yes.
Is it already out?
Ascendants. Cool.
It is. Yeah. It's just a little booklet on Amazon. But
So you can go to Amazon
So
and get
good.
that book right now.
Cool.
Fantastic.
All right, Kate. Well, you have been a blessing and you enjoy your day. And thank you for spending it with us at
Yeah.
the Red Letter Disciple.
Thank y'all. Oh my goodness. This has been so much fun. And again, I'm so encouraged by what y'all are doing and the joy truly that you're helping cultivate in our walks with the Lord as well.
Thanks, Kate. We'll see you later. Kate's got an amazing story, right? I mean, it's kind of something that, let's be real, you wish you were, you kind of wish you had that opportunity to see how you do getting something like that. But hey, we absolutely love Kate and the work that she's doing. And if you want to connect more with her or any of the resources that she mentioned that have been powerful for her and her journey, we've got all those links in the show notes, as well as the first opportunity. That's right. This is the first opportunity today that you've ever heard about Giving Challenge. And so we want you, pastors and church leaders, to get in this generosity movement that is launching October 5, 2025, with a 40-day challenge complete with sermons and small group materials. If you feel like our generosity at your church can grow, this is the tool that's going to catalyze it, perhaps more than anything else or more than you thought or imagined. And so you can check out that and Kate and all of those links at our show notes at redletterpodcast.com. We also have a really amazing guest. Speaking of more and more generosity, we're going to have Peter Greer on the podcast next week. Peter's the CEO of Hope International. a worldwide organization that's just helping so many communities around the world escape from poverty. But what he does, especially, and even his ministry, their organization, is they really help people escape from the scarcity mindset that is so prevalent today. So he talks about the scarcity mindset versus the abundance mindset, what God calls us to have, and the bad math behind the scarcity mindset and why they open source like everything that they do in their nonprofit. It's going to be a really powerful conversation. Don't miss it. The way you don't miss it, you subscribe or you follow. So make sure you do that on whatever platform you're listening or watching. And if you've got an extra minute, it's probably all it'll take. Hit 5 stars, put a little review, and we'll be back with you next week. God bless you, and we'll see you back next week for the next episode.